Trick Daddy, the rapper, actually wore a Sam Madison Dolphins jersey on the photo from his album cover. I mean, that's how big of a deal that secondary was. That was an acceptable thing for a famous rapper to wear on their album.
Hey everybody, welcome into Monkey Knife Fights NFL Preview Show Week 2 edition. I'm Dan Watkins. Joining me, as he will throughout the entire season, is the great Nick Whalen of Rotowire.com. Nick, been a minute since we've done a show together. How's everything going?
It really has, man. Yeah, I thought I was going to see you last week. It was good to host with Connor. Hadn't chatted with him in a while either. But yeah, it feels great to be back. You know, we follow each other on social media and whatnot. We check in every now and then. You sent me a great photo last week of a man in a Jay Cutler Dolphins jersey at the Pats Dolphins game, presumably. So we're staying in touch on the important things. But yeah, it's great to be back hosting with you and looking forward to breaking down a fun week too.
Yeah, I was in Miami, went to that just absolute train wreck of a performance by the Patriots. But yeah, anytime I see just an obscure jersey in the wild, I got to send it to you because I know you appreciate it. And yeah, the Jay Cutler jersey was definitely out there. But I was wondering, can you guess what the most popular jersey is at a Dolphins game?
At a Dolphins game, man, that's a really good question. I mean, I would hope it's a Ricky Williams Dolphins jersey.
You got it.
I could see. It is okay.
Yep.
Good. Whew, thank God.
Yep.
That's one that I've always wanted.
It's in all different colors too. You got the teal, you got the orange, you got the white. I saw even like one of those. I never understood the weird like black jersey for teams that don't have black in their normal color schemes, but there was a couple of those too. Yeah, a lot of Ricky Williams, a lot of Tuas, a lot of Tyreek Hill. And a lot of Dan Marino still too, and a couple Zach Thomas.
Yeah, well, I was gonna say Zach Thomas would be my second guess. I mean, obviously you'd love to see some like Brock Marion, Sam Madison from the early 2000s. That secondary was just absolutely loaded. By the way, Trick Daddy, the rapper, actually wore a Sam Madison Dolphins jersey on the photo from his album cover. I mean, that's how big of a deal that secondary was. That was an acceptable thing for a famous rapper to wear on their album. So. Yeah, I mean, the thing with the Dolphins is other than Ricky Williams, whose jersey would you have bought from 2008 to 2018? Who's the most relevant Dolphin during that time? It would be kind of a mixed bag, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I would have ever been able to buy a Ryan Tannehill jersey. That's
no. That's really a depressing jersey. To have to take that up to the counter and buy that. Nobody wants to go through that experience. I mean, Dante Culpepper.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably still rock a Jason Taylor jersey if I was a Dolphins fan.
That's timeless. That's timeless. Yeah. The 99. Yeah, absolutely. No question about that.
Definitely. And going back to Zach Thomas quickly, a woman sitting in the section diagonal to us, she had a sign that she was holding and it said, "Do the right thing, put Zach in the hall." So
as if it's a moral debate. I love that.
Yeah, to get Zach Thomas in the Hall of Fame, but just an absolute absurd week one is in the books. It did not disappoint at all. You had that crazy witching hour at the end of the 1 o'clock window, head coaches making dumb decisions, the public getting absolutely crushed by the books, myself included, some idiot in Miami leaving his grill on during the game and torching 10 cars. And then also Tom Brady beating the Cowboys as he always does. Football is just so back. Any takes you want to get off your chest here from week one before we get going?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that wasn't you and Jason who lit the cars on fire in Miami. I was a little concerned when I saw that. I'm like, who are the only people I know at this game? I hope it's not them. But yeah, that was kind of a disastrous start as far as tailgating goes. But other than that, I mean, it was business as usual for the Jags. Got a late lead, obviously blew that lead, ended the game with a terrible interception. They're off and running. Despite getting 2 interceptions against the Commanders. But yeah, you said it. I mean, there were so many big road favorites in week one. And I'm sitting there with my sports betting pals here in Milwaukee, and we're looking at the board. And we're like, we know for a fact that all these big road favorites are not going to win. At least 2 or 3 of them are not going to cover and maybe even lose outright. And that's exactly what happened. But it's impossible to know, who's going to get tripped up. We were saying did the Jets maybe get the Ravens? I was really confident in the Colts taking care of business against the Texans. All of a sudden they're down 20-3. We see it every single year. And it's so hard to predict. I mean, it's impossible. There's a reason that the best sports bettors in the world, are happy to go 60% at best.
Yeah, just a crazy week one. As always, I think 5 out of 6 years now, I've been knocked out of my survivor pool in week one. I had the Titans. So I think Ryan Daboll is a very good coach, and I think he's going to do something interesting with the Giants.
I think you never bet it. Had we known that he was wearing the New York Fire Department hat I think that maybe changes things. You never bet against a coach who's wearing that. It seems like it kind of brings some extra luck. So had we known that, yeah, maybe I would have gone the other way. I got burned on that game as well. But yeah, I mean, what in the Circus Survivor contest, which we follow pretty closely at Rotowire, I mean, I think almost 60% of the entries were wiped out in week one. Like the Ravens were the most popular pick and they made it through, but I think the next 4 most popular picks all ended up losing outright.
Yeah, San Francisco. Yeah, I mean, you got to blame the weather for that one. The Bears getting that week.
I mean, that was a mess. We've seen rain games plenty of times before, especially in the Midwest. That was so far beyond your typical rain game. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen anything like that with the amount of rain that was pooling on the field.
I didn't know hurricanes went to Chicago, but apparently,
the rare freshwater hurricane blowing in off of Lake Michigan.
Yeah, exactly. All right, moving on. Let's get right into this week 2 slate. We got some fun matchups in the 1 o'clock window, including a battle in the NFC South. You got the Bucs taking on the Saints. And let's talk about Tom Brady here. 280.5 passing yards is his more or less this week. Finished with just 212 against Dallas. Tom's all of a sudden talking about how his arm is a little banged up, bruised, and that he might not be able to keep doing this for too much longer. He is 45 years old after all. And since joining Tampa, Nick, 4 regular season games against New Orleans, he's thrown for more than 240 just once. How do you feel about Tom in this one?
I think this number is way too high. If you watch that game against Dallas, it was somewhat of a beatdown by the Buccaneers, but it was more just Dallas not being able to move the ball. I mean, the Buccaneers had to settle for 5 field goals on their first 5 possessions. They couldn't get anything going in the red zone. And a lot of the damage that they did moving the ball down the field was Leonard Fournette on the ground. He looked fantastic. I wasn't impressed really with the passing game. They looked a little out of sorts. I actually think Dallas's defense didn't play all that bad in that game. And we saw Brady finish with I think under 200 yards, 195 yards in week 1. And he's not going to have Chris Godwin. Julio Jones did not practice yesterday. Mike Evans did not practice yesterday. Russell Gage, Brashad Perriman, those guys are also on the injury report. Even Fournette is on the injury report, and he goes up against a pretty good Saints defense. So to me, I think this number is way too high. I think we get a close game. I'm actually picking the Saints to win this one outright. And with Mike Evans, like if he's at 100%, maybe that makes me think twice. But I thought to me, he looked a little gimpy in the second half. And, if he's not really ready to go with no Godwin, it's tough for me to see Brady approaching 300 yards in this game.
And then on the other side, you got Jameis Winston. He finished with 269 last week. In this week's contest against the Bucs, his number is 235.5 passing yards, more or less, for Jameis.
Ooh, see, the thing is, if I'm picking the Saints to win this game, Jameis probably has to play pretty well. We need to get second half Jameis instead of first half Jameis last week against Atlanta. So I'll go more here. I mean, Michael Thomas looked great. I think, 2 touchdowns in his return is like the best case scenario. Jarvis Landry goes over 100 yards. You got Chris Olave as the third receiver. And then, of course, Alvin Kamara, who can catch passes out of the backfield. So I'll go less on Brady and I'll go more on Jameis.
Yeah, I'll go more on Jameis. And I know we don't have a prop for it, but I'm going to go more 1.5 interceptions from him as well in this game.
Oh, yeah, that's a given. That's a given.
Definitely. And I'm also loving I took a flyer on Jarvis Landry at the end of my fantasy draft. I'm thinking that's going to be a great pick this year. And I'm thinking we're going to see him on some MKF contests before too long as well.
I sure hope so. He's somebody that I always feel like I'm grabbing in like the final 3 rounds of a draft. I recently compared him to like Harrison Barnes in fantasy basketball, where you're like, I'm not excited about this. Like hopefully I'm not relying on this guy, but at the end of the year, he's, just going to rack up targets. He's going to rack up yardage. And probably finish as Harrison Barnes always finds a way to finish in the top 100, even though nobody likes him. And I feel like Landry's kind of at that point in his career.
Very good. Very good. Let's talk about the Saints' other wide receiver, Michael Thomas, making his return after missing all of last season. 5.5 receptions is his more or less. Last week, first time we've seen him since 2020, has a very productive day. 5 catches, 57 yards, 2 touchdowns. What do you expect out of Thomas this week?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a huge yardage day for Michael Thomas in week 1, but 2 touchdown catches, 2 really difficult catches, especially the first one. I mean, the way he just snagged that thing out in midair, that's not a catch that every receiver can make. So I think you have to be really encouraged by what we saw from him. I mean, this number to me it's a little high at 67.5, but if I think Jameis is going to probably approach 250 and maybe go over 250 yards, Michael Thomas is obviously going to factor into that. So let's go more on Michael Thomas.
All right, very good. And then we talked about Leonard Fournette quick. I think he's looking pretty good. Not that overweight Lenny. 69.5 rushing yards for him is his more or less 127 yards on just 12 carries last week. He was a monster. Last year, more than 70 rushing yards in just 5 of 14 games. And he was held to less than 35 in both games against the Saints. What do you expect from him in this one?
Yeah, I mean, this number, I think, feels a little low when you're comparing it to week one, but it's a good Saints defense, and it's a Saints defense that allowed a bunch of rushing yards last week, but 70 plus of those were via Marcus Mariota. And, you have now the complete opposite of Marcus Mariota in Tom Brady. You're not really worried at all about Tom Brady scampering out of the pocket. So, to me, I think that Saints defense can, cue in on Leonard Fournette, especially with no Godwin. You really don't have as many weapons as we're used to for Tom Brady that you have to worry about. No Gronk, of course. So, if I think the Saints are winning this game, I think they slow down Leonard Fournette. I don't think he has like a horrific day, but I'll go less on 69.5.
Yeah, a little tough, especially with that hamstring injury too as well. He's been on that injury report, so I'm gonna take the less here as well. I think the Tampa's going to try to throw more than anything. Moving on, you got Dolphins Ravens. Fun one there. We got Tua Tagovailoa is 248.5 passing yards, more or less. He finished with 270 last week against the Pats, and more than 250 yards in just 3 games last season, though. Nick, what do you think we get from Tua this week?
Oh man. Well, good pronunciation on Tagovailoa, by the way. I find myself like going to extreme lengths to avoid that. I know there's a great clip of Mike Francesa from like 5 years ago when Tua was in college, claiming that I think he said the words, everyone calls him Tua T, which I've never heard anyone but Mike Francesa say, but I'm trying to make that happen. So I'm trying to get Tua T off the ground. This is a really good number for Tua T. I mean, he was at 270 last week against what's not a terrible Patriots defense. I mean, it was a defense that was out of sorts, and maybe it's going to take some time to gel. But, this Ravens defense, I think you automatically think of them as a great defense, but, they lost the starting cornerback for the season last week. They have a couple other corners banged up. I think this is going to be a really, really competitive game. I think the Dolphins, much like the Jets last week, are going to be able to slow down the Ravens running game. And I think, they're going to have to score through the air to keep up with Lamar Jackson. So I'll go more on Tua. I don't like him. I still don't think he's good, but for this week, I'm going more.
If I can, quick story. One of my first sports reports I ever had to do for the radio station I worked for a couple of years ago, it was a Pats Dolphins week, and the Celtics were also playing the Bucs. So in the same sports report, within about 20 seconds of each other, I had to be able to pronounce Giannis Antetokounmpo and Tua Tagovailoa, and it took me about 50 tries. Luckily, it was recorded and not live. But very, very tough pronunciations for both those guys. I'm going to go less on Tua. I just don't think he's going to put 2 great weeks back together yardage-wise. So I'm going less here. He only finished with 158 against the Ravens last year as well. So I think 248 is just a little too high. Tyreek Hill, 75.5 receiving. Actually, I'll back up. We'll do Lamar Jackson first since he's up there on the screen. 219.5 passing yards for Jackson. Finished with 213 last week against the Jets. He's thrown for more than 220 in each of his 2 career games against the Dolphins. Nick, I really like his fantasy prop this week as well at 23.5. How do you feel?
I feel the same way. J.K. Dobbins, it sounds like it has a pretty good chance to play in this game. Maybe that changes things for the Ravens run game, but you got to be a little bit concerned that they weren't able to move the ball on the ground, which of course has been their bread and butter for years now against that Jets defense. And I think this is a pretty good Dolphins defense. They did a good job slowing down Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris last week. So I think it could follow a similar script where Lamar Jackson has to win this game with his arm. And, he showed it off last week. He had 2 touchdowns to Duvernay. Had one to Bateman, looked really good, kind of taking some deep shots. So I think we see a similar script. I'll go more on Lamar.
Yep, more as well. And let's go to Tyreek Hill here. 75.5 receiving yards, finished with 94 last week in his Dolphins debut. But Baltimore has done a good job in the past containing him. I think he's only gone over 75.5 just once in like 4 games against the Ravens. I don't know if Hill's going to quite have a monster day this week. How do you feel?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, if you look at his game logs the last couple of years, it's usually kind of an up and down battle from week to week. If he has one big week, there's times that he would follow it up with 3 catches for 35 yards, and that's even with Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback, not Tua T. So this prop is just low enough, especially the way that they force fed him at times last week, that it makes you think that if he busts even like 145 yarder, you feel pretty good about him getting like 25 more yards the rest of the game. to go over that prop. So I think we're going to disagree on this one. I got Tua going for more than 248.5. I think Tyreek Hill's got to be a big part of that.
All right. Yep. I'm going to go less and less on both those guys. The rest of the slate here at the 1 o'clock window: New England, Pittsburgh, Carolina, the Giants, Jets, Browns. That's a fun one. Yeah. I can't wait to watch that. I'm sure Red Zone's going to be focused there. Washington and Detroit, Indy, Jacksonville. Anybody else kind of catch your mind here? Catch your eye, not your mind.
Well, both, but you're, as a Pats guy, I want to ask you, your take on the Patriots being 2-point favorites on the road at Pittsburgh. There's a couple puzzling lines this week, but I think that one's at the top of the list.
Yeah. It opened, I think, at a pick 'em, and now all of a sudden it got up to Pats. I think it's 2.5 as of Thursday when we're recording this show. I don't know if that's just there's probably a lot of like Vegas is looking like this is a spot historically where the Patriots bounce back big time after a loss, and they would go out and just roll the ball out and crush Pittsburgh. But I don't think that's going to be the case. I would stay away from the favorite line completely, but I do like the under in this game. I think there's going to be some struggling to get into the end zone. I think it's 40.5 is the total here. The Pats being favorites, I think it's probably they just don't like Mitchell Trubisky. I think that's probably what it comes down to.
I think that's part of it. I mean, Mac Jones certainly didn't look a whole lot better, and he's got the back issue this week. Sounds like he's going to play through it. Won't be too bad. But yeah, that's the thing is I think lost in the fact that Pittsburgh got the win against a really good Cincinnati team is the fact that they had no offense at all. They had 5 extremely costly turnovers forced in that game for Cincinnati, and Pittsburgh barely won and probably should have lost multiple times with the way that Cincinnati's kicking game transpired at the end. And, I had people asking me, fantasy wise, like, oh, Chase Claypool, they're using him like Debo. He had 6 carries. I'm like, the only reason Chase Claypool was carrying the ball 6 times is because they had no offense. They had to resort to like trick plays essentially just to move the ball. I mean, the Steelers reached the red zone on 2 of 13 drives. I think it kind of the win kind of covers up just how inept that offense was. And, I think if you're talking like Chase Claypool, George Pickens props, you're not feeling great about it after week 1 with the way that, that offense failed to do anything against Cincinnati. So I get it with New England, but it's given a lot of credit to
TJ Watt's out as well. TJ Watt is out.
Watt's out. Sure. But still, I mean, I could see it being like Pittsburgh -1 or even making a pickup, but to make the Patriots 2-point favorites, to me, it's putting a lot of faith in Belichick, who I guess has not gone 0-2 since like 2001.
Yeah, I mean, we'll find out here. I mean, normally, like I said, historically, that's a spot where they would bounce back big time. But number 12 is in Tampa, so that's
right.
But one player, Nick, that is catching my eye here in the rest of this slate: Jonathan Taylor, 105.5 rushing yards, 4 games in his career against the Jags, averages 117 and over 6 yards per carry. I don't need to tell you about this because
you do not.
But I'm going more on JT.
I'm going more on anything against the Jaguars. You name the prop, I'll take the more on it. Weirdly, the Jags have played the Colts very well. They're 8-5 straight up against Indy over the last 13 meetings. Obviously, had a big win against the Colts late last season.
Yep.
So those games always do tend to be weird, but yeah, I mean, Jonathan Taylor is going to put up numbers. We saw Washington kind of march up and down the field, especially in the second half against the Jags last week. And I think this is a pretty big bounce back spot for the Colts, but a little concerned about the lack of weapons. I think other than Michael Pittman and Jonathan Taylor, like this Colts offense is really not all that spectacular whatsoever.
No, not at all. Moving on to the late afternoon slate, kind of meh when I look at it. So I figured, let's do a touchdown dance, Nick, for this one. You got the Rams and taking on the Falcons, Seattle, San Francisco, Houston, Denver, Arizona, Vegas, and Cincinnati, Dallas. So how this works, guys, is 3 players you think are going to get into the end zone during this slate. Nick, who you got?
Man, a lot of options here. Some lopsided spreads certainly in this late window. Pretty much all of them are slanted one way or the other. I'm going to go Cooper Kupp. To me, that seems like a near lock. I would take him every single week, especially against this Atlanta secondary. I will go Deebo Samuel, another controversial pick. Should have had 2 touchdowns last week. He had a fumble deep in the red zone early in that game against the Chicago Bears. And with no Elijah Mitchell, I think for better or for worse, I don't know if Deebo wants this, but I think they're going to be running him probably more than they expected early in the season. And then I like Javonte Williams for Denver. We all know how that game transpired on Monday night against Seattle. I think you play that game out 100 times and like 98 times Denver wins the game, and like 80 times Denver wins the game convincingly. Just weird fumbles, weird play calling. drives stalling when they shouldn't have stalled. Overall, I was pretty encouraged by what I saw from that Denver offense, especially the running game early on. They were gashing Seattle in that first half. So I think Javonte Williams can have a big day against this Houston defense.
Yeah. The only explanation I have for Denver losing that is the curse of Ralph, my dog. He picks Monday Night Football games. He picked Denver. They lost. He's now 6-15 lifetime on his Monday night picks. So I think
he's got to get it together, man.
Yeah, the curse of Ralph was going on in Denver last week. Nick, we actually had 2 of the 3 same guys. I'm going Cooper Kupp. If he's on the slate, he's basically like having the free space in bingo for this one. So I'm going Cooper Kupp. Javonte Williams as well. As you mentioned, Houston gave up the second most rushing touchdowns in the league last year, and they already gave up 1 to Taylor. So I think Williams will have a monster day. And I'm going to go Joe Mixon as well. The Cowboys gave up over 150 yards on the ground to Tampa last week, and I think Cincinnati's going to be up in this one. So Mixon's just going to have a lot of volume, and I think he finds the back of the end zone. It finds the end zone.
Yeah, he had kind of an inefficient day in week 1 against Pittsburgh, but I think he bounces back. I mean, it was encouraging. They used him a ton in that game, and yeah, I love this spot for Cincinnati. I think Dallas. I mean, I don't think you'd feel good about the Cowboys even if Dak came out of that game healthy with how poorly that offense played against Tampa Bay. But yeah, throwing Cooper Rush into the mix, I think this is a major bounce back spot for Cincinnati, even if T. Higgins doesn't end up playing.
What do you think about Dallas here going forward? Do they survive without Dak these 6 games?
Well, it depends how much game. It depends how many games he misses, right? And that's the thing, is the schedule is not exactly a gauntlet. There are some tough ones in there. I know they play the Rams in week 5, but I think you lose to Cincinnati, you go to 0-2. The next 2 games at the Giants, home against the Commanders, those are borderline winnable with Cooper Rush. I think we're probably overrating both of those teams right now, the Giants and the Commanders, because they are 1-0, but I don't think either of them looked all that convincing in week 1. I think the Giants are probably going to come crashing back down to earth at some point in the next couple of weeks here. So yeah, I think if you come out of, let's say he misses 4 games, if you could go 2-2, you're thrilled. I mean, even if you go 1-3, I think you'll take it. And obviously you need to go on a hell of a run with Dak once he comes back. But again, it's not like they look great with Dak in the lineup. He left that game midway through the 4th quarter, and they were doing absolutely nothing on offense before that. So Dak injury aside, I think Dallas maybe has some bigger issues.
Yeah, I think they can tread water here, but I don't think they're going to. It's not like they're going to be in first place of the division come the end of October when Dak is back. So moving on, let's talk about this just doozy of a Sunday night game we got going on, and I think it's really the biggest question we're facing as a country, Nick. Why do the NFL schedule makers insist on putting the Chicago Bears in primetime 3 times a year?
The same reason that they keep putting teams like the Giants in prime time. It's the market size, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if the Bears are bad. You want that Chicago market. But yeah, I don't understand it. I mean, we get 2 Monday night games this week for some reason. There's a slew of other games that would make more sense as the night game. And some of these you're like, okay, when you set the schedule, maybe the matchup looked better at the time.
Yeah.
I don't think so. This is one that we knew was going to be kind of a clunker no matter what.
Yeah, it's just like you just see, and it's like, oh, Bears Packers, okay, throw it in prime time. Here we go. But yeah, so let's talk about a couple of the props we got here. We got Aaron Rodgers, 255.5 passing yards is his more or less. He struggled last week, finished with just 195. But do you think this is going to be a bounce back game for Rodgers?
I'm starting to get a little concerned. I think it's a bounce back game for the Packers. I made them my best bet this week in my Beating the Book column, which you can find on Rotowire. It's a big number, but I think the Bears are really bad, and I think the Packers will bounce back. They always seem to beat the Bears pretty handily. But I was watching some comments from Rodgers yesterday. He looks fed up already, man. I mean, I told some friends, like he reminds me of like LeBron 2018 on that Cavs team, like after they traded Kyrie for Isaiah Thomas. Right. And like you could just see like LeBron was like, I'm done with these guys. Like I'm sick of this. And it feels like Rodgers is already in that zone. I mean, he was asked specifically about Amari Rodgers, who they took in the 3rd round last year, and you could just see like the disgust on his face. Like he's like, well, this is what I've been given, so I guess I just got to work with it. It's not looking good, man. I think he was pretty discouraged by how that receiving core played in week 1. I think he said all the right things going into the season, and they were terrible. I mean, they were awful throughout that entire game. Luckily you get the Bears. They'll take care of business here, but I wouldn't say I'm worried about the Packers quite yet, but I think at this point it's difficult to pick them to win that division.
Yeah. It's not looking good right now for Green Bay. That's for sure. I'm going to go less as well here. We talked about this a lot last year with Aaron Rodgers, where he was just efficient, right? Not putting up the big monster yardage games, but he was like kind of hovering around those 240s, but still finding the end zone. And the Green Bay was just winning. And I think that's kind of the script we're going to get here Sunday night, as you just talked about. Justin Fields on the other side, 189.5 passing yards is his more or less. 121 yards through the air last week in that monsoon or hurricane, whatever you want to call it. 2 career games against the Packers. He averages about 199. I feel like this number is just a little too high for me too with Justin Fields.
Yeah, it's probably a little too high. I'm still very high on this Packers defense. I thought they were just out of sorts a little bit early on against Minnesota. I don't know if like some of the things were a little too complicated. There's plenty of talent on that team, but there was just a ton of miscommunications that you could tell even through the telecast in week 1. So I think they regroup. I mean, there's really, outside of Darnell Mooney, not a lot of weapons you have to worry about on this Bears offense. And, props to Justin Fields, by the way, for even getting over 100 yards last week. I mean, that is a monumental accomplishment in that weather. But I think things can, kind of reset and we get back to equilibrium for both of these teams this week. So Justin Fields most likely struggles. I'll go less on 189.5.
Yeah, he doesn't have Justin Jefferson to throw to in this one. So
he sure does not.
All right. And then a couple of the skill guys here. Aaron Jones, we got 3.5 receptions for his more or less, and also 16.5 fantasy points. 3 catches last week, just 5 carries. So I'm wondering, is this backfield flipped in Green Bay? Are we trending more towards an A.J. Dillon offense?
I don't think so. I think part of that was A.J. Dillon stayed in the game late. He was even in on that last drive when Jordan Love came in, had a long reception. So that kind of goosed his numbers a little bit. And after the game, I mean, Rodgers said it. Matt LaFleur, who calls the plays for Green Bay, said it. Aaron Jones can't finish a game with 8 touches. And that's been a common theme in a lot of games where Green Bay's come up short over the last couple of years, is they panic. Rodgers panics, the coaching staff panics, and they get away from what they do best. I don't think that happens this week. I think they make a concerted effort, especially given how last week went, to get Aaron Jones involved. So I would take the more on 16.5 fantasy points. I would take the more on 55.5 rushing yards. Like, to me, it's more about total yards. I think he's going to be involved in the passing game as well. So not super confident about the rushing total, but whatever we have for his total yard total, I'd go more on that.
All right, very good. And then on the other side, you got David Montgomery, 55.5 rushing yards. Last week, 17 carries, 26 yards. So he has to more than double his output from a week ago to get to 56 yards. Nick, can he do that?
What a line. And obviously the elements played a role there, but man, that is an all-timer. I think you got to go less here. Unless he rips off a couple big runs early on. I think Chicago's probably playing from behind, and maybe he gets involved as a pass catcher, certainly capable of doing that. But I don't see this as like a ground and pound attack for the Bears. So I'll go less.
Very good. Yeah, I'll go less as well here. I think we're in agreement across the board when it comes to this game. All right, very good. Thanks for watching, guys. Don't forget to hit subscribe on our YouTube page right here. And we got some great college football content here on MKF coming out as well. Other NFL shows. We'll have our Monday night preview as well, too. So check that out. Hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching.